Benvenuti. Benvenuti. It's a great pleasure to welcome the Chair Professor for Social Media at the City University of Hong Kong, Christian Wagner. You have the passion for collective intelligence, creativity, and knowledge transfer, the passion and the knowledge. And in your position as the Chair Professor and the previous Provost of the City University of Hong Kong, a true innovation hub for the creative industries in Hong Kong, with the best mix of East and West. So both complement, and that complement gives a magic strength. Traditionally, nowadays, and hopefully as well for the future. Now, you really bridge, you were born and raised in the port city of Hamburg in the north of Germany, Germany's port to the world. And then from there, as an entrepreneur, after doing your PhD in Vancouver, I think, and your master's degree in computer science and information systems in Germany, you jumped into the startup world already more than 30 years ago, I think 35 years ago, in Southern California, where you also have your beloved home in Hong Kong and Southern California. And then since almost 30 years, yes. Oh, just keep here, Elizabeth. Keep with us. And then for almost 30 years with all the passion in Hong Kong. And thank you very much. You have a quite good track record here at our desk conference. Unforgettable in Silicon Valley, Menlo Park, your statements, and we are very curious. Welcome, Benvenuti at Villa La Conina.
Thank you, Achim, for the kind words. Of course, Achim has been exaggerating a little bit, but in general, it's very complimentary. So thank you. Let me start by sort of setting up my presentation. As Achim told us, I will be talking about collective intelligence and the creation of knowledge transfer, but we should always break rules. And so I created a new subtitle since we talked last time, because life has gone on. So my talk will be slightly rephrased to From Collective to Artisan Intelligence, how AI changes the world. Because so much has happened just in the last 3 months, I thought I couldn't let that go by. And so bring this into the presentation as we are seemingly going to speak in a circular round there. And let me start out by sort of giving away everything in a nutshell in the beginning, so you can leave right thereafter. The way I should put it is, the world has always relied on collective intelligence. In fact, that's what we do all the time. And researchers have recognized also for a long time that in firms, the knowledge of the many and integrating inside the firm the knowledge of the many is one of the few true areas where so the competence lies, and this is not to be taken away. But as individuals, we also have relied on collective intelligence, even as simple as, oh, people are lining up in front of the store, there must be something good inside, right? So we know all this, and yet traditionally, collective intelligence has been rather local, because this was like word of mouth. And so then in 1993, when the World Wide Web came about, suddenly this changed. And so here now we had communication and collaboration costs really going down so dramatically. And suddenly we could spread our intelligence throughout the world, bringing our fragmented knowledge together. And that's created really this vision of democratization of knowledge, because everybody could partake, give and take. And so emphasized really the importance of collective intelligence even more. And so this is what I'll explain. I'll exemplify that a little bit. And then I'll demonstrate a little bit to you that it actually works, right? So because we often talk about it, but then why does it work? It's not so clear. And so I'll illustrate a little bit with some examples. I'll actually also point out that there are multiple collective intelligences, and even something which might work quite differently, collective creativity. But then I point out that it's an almost inevitable path from that that humans do, we do, to this drive, oh, people want to computerize that. And so that's where we move from the collective to machine learning to artificial intelligence, and seemingly taking all this advantage that we have or we have had away from us, and so moving it to the machine. And then the question arises, of course, does that make our collective intelligence obsolete? Which is so real dramatic questions we ask ourselves as we see the recent advances, right? And so my point will then be to say in the end, no, but specialization will matter much more in the future than it does now. And that is really going to be, so then the essence of how I will end. And in doing so, I hope to answer some of Achim's questions that he raised also in our startup. And so let me then start out by pointing to a book that, it became a book, to this famous work from 1999, which describes what I mentioned as the democratization of knowledge through the World Wide Web, the Clue Train Manifesto. And if you have not read it, you can, so it's available online. And it was fantastic in that it outlined this logic of, you might say, democratization of free access to knowledge in those early days, empowered by the web. And so the authors came up, and you see some, some of the famous fathers of the the internet, World Wide Web. They outlined some thesis of how this new world operates. And so you see me highlighting and read a few, and they particularly focused on consumer versus industry here, but it also works in a way in consumers to government. Markets are conversations. Oh, wow, new idea. Markets are not products and supply and demand. Markets are conversations. The internet is enabling conversations among human beings that were simply not possible in an area of mass media. And around this time, actually a little bit earlier, in the early 1990s, I believe it was, you may recall, so if you're an older person like me, IBM at the time brought out the 386, 387 chip package. One was the math coprocessor. And so this 387 coprocessor actually miscalculated. And this was unbelievable, right? And so some people reported that in the bulletin boards. And so that was the first time when such messages which were posted on the bulletin boards actually got traction, because IBM said, no, it happens once every 3 million years or so. And then people were starting posting, no, it happens actually quite a bit. And so the power of the many online forced IBM actually to pull that 387 math coprocessor chip and to make adjustments. So this was so showing the power of the many with their shared intelligence to have impact on the market. And so network conversation are enabling powerful new forms of social organization and knowledge exchange to emerge, just as I described very quickly before, because of course the communication and collaboration costs are dramatically driven down. And this is also, and we all know this, right? People in network markets have figured out they get far better information and support from one another than from vendors, which all of us do these days as we watch the YouTube video or similar when you want to learn about a product. There are no secrets. The network market knows more than companies do about their own products. And so this was the vision, this was the hope, and the internet would make that all possible. And some said already then it's a little bit blue-eyed, because the internet is a tool, IT is a tool, we all understand. And so it's like the sledgehammer. And if we think, oh, we have the advantage of the many, the quote unquote, the other side will also learn how to swing the sledgehammer, right? It's a tool. And so it's just kind of who has it first and figures it out quickly. But then it's typically always, so you might say, an arms race, right? And so, and therefore, fast forward, 2023, fake news and is AI, artificial intelligence taking over. And so this, I chose that as an image. Of course, see President Biden and Kim Jong-un sitting here at a table on a beach at a sunset, which I created by telling the AI software Midjourney. So I'm not a graphic artist, even though I'm in creative media. I told the software, please create for me a realistic photo of Joe Biden and Kim Jong-un sitting together on a beach near sunset drinking Mai Tais. And that is what I get. That's all I'm doing. And this is what I get some, thank you, some variations of it. And I pick the one that I like best. I didn't describe that they're sitting at a table. I didn't describe the fruit. So that's all the AI is filling in. And 60 seconds, right? That's how long it takes. So yes, so this is part of our awareness. That's where the AI is so going for us, and especially for individuals who they can operate in text but not in graphics. Of course, quite wonderful, but of course also quite scary. And with that, I move on to my next slide. And this I took a quote from YouTube. And YouTube, so on one of the, as you know, if you watch YouTube videos, there's also discussions on the side. And in one of the discussions, this is just a YouTube commenter. This is not the creator of that particular video. One of the commenters wrote, this is Jimmy as promo, let's be honest, social media ruined the world, made it more divisive and toxic. Would rather go back to the 90s and early 2000s in a much better time. And he got 259 likes for this. Quite astonishing. So as we see that people are realizing, technology is not necessarily the bringer of truth sharing and a single truth, right? As we all know. And with that, I finish my presentation. Not yet. And with that, I start out and illustrate a little bit this journey that I want to describe from collective to artificial and to where I see the artisan intelligence developing. So the promise of collective intelligence. And with that, I come to an example that I looked at with one of my former PhD students who is from Bangladesh. And as some of you know, so Bangladesh has traditionally been a less developed country and had significant food shortages and also difficulty with its harvesting. So sugarcane is one of their main harvests, and a lot of subsistence farmers, and they have to bring their sugarcane to the mills at the right time so that it's kind of squashed and squeezed, and then the sugar sap kind of taken out. And so all this is not so trivial a system, because how would the farmers know when to bring this to the sugar mill and so get this job done? This was actually one of the projects that the United Nations looked at in terms of the development. And as you know, the United Nations undertakes a lot of development projects, sometimes not so successful, sometimes so coming in with, you might say, overwhelming force, bringing resources and a lot of know-how from the outside. But once the project ends and the UN leaves, nothing much is left behind. So as we see here, so in the UN's own report, moreover, many projects are not sustainable, as sustainability is rarely considered in detail as part of the selection and design process. And so this is a typical thing that projects oftentimes either they are too small and not worthwhile, or there must be a way found to make them live on after the funding goes away from the outside. And that oftentimes depends on making the project fit the local environment. And that's the difficult side, right? So if the experts come from afar, they know how to figure this out, but it doesn't work in the local context. And this is where I come to collective intelligence, namely, how do we know about the local context? Well, let's ask the locals. And so I give you this example that developed in Bangladesh. That is the Ipurji system. And so I mentioned before, the sugarcane farmers, what they have to do is they have to go to the mill, but in order to be allowed to go to the sugar mill and get their sugarcane crushed, they need to get some kind of a ticket. And traditionally, there was a little paper ticket that was delivered to them. I think it was like a postman bringing it to them, but across Bangladesh. And sometimes these postmen were late. they didn't come, they brought these tickets to the wrong place. And it's not that everybody, so the rural farmers had their own mailbox. No, it's maybe dropped at some local dispensary, and maybe you get your ticket and maybe not. And that creates a lot of uncertainty for the farmers, because for the farmers, as I pointed out, it may take them 3 days. So I get my ticket, then I cut my sugar cane, then I deliver. Maybe a day's travel to the sugar mill. If I get my ticket too late, I may be too late. I have to rush, then I cannot cut all the sugar. If I'm too early, so it rots in transport. So lots of kind of hazard for them. And that's really, for subsistence farmers, this is a very significant impact. So, and as I said, so traditionally these were paper notices. And notices were often delayed, lost, delivered to the wrong individual, or they relied on intermediaries. So the delivery person didn't give it to the farmer themselves, but to someone else. Can you bring it to them? And then, lost in traffic once again. So as a result, sugarcane would rot on the ground or be delivered late. And if it's late, there's a weight loss because it's hot there, so fluids get out. And so subsistence farmers experience significant economic uncertainty because of that. And that always hit the, you might say, the smaller farmers more than the larger ones. The larger farmers had ways of finding ways to get it still to the sugar mill, or so they just had scale. And the smaller ones, you miss that ticket, and this might be so we do you in as a farmer. So they created not anything on the World Wide Web. They created a text message system. So where a subsistence farmer, this is what simple rural technology. Pretty much, even if you're a subsistence farmer, this is the type of phone you might have. So this is kind of this is like a 10-euro phone type thing, right? This is the bottom of the barrel phone, and you don't have to buy much internet because this is a text message. So, and you can buy these like really for fractional dollars, so fractional euros. You can buy your text allowance. And so then you would get the message reliably to you, no intermediaries, no nothing. Then you go off to the farm, and you go off to the, cut your sugar cane and deliver to the sugar mill. And there you are. Dramatic reduction in lost or misplaced, misdirected produce, increased yield, economic benefits to the subsistence farmers, and lower the economic uncertainty, right? Now, the interesting point was when we asked those subsistence farmers, so first of all, is this good? They all pointed out how good this is. And it all worked for them because even if you're at the very low end, you have one of those phones. But, and that's the interesting thing, when asked what they most liked about the EPG systems, we might think, oh yeah, I make some more money. So that definitely was. So, but it was reduction of decision uncertainty. Not every day I have to worry. Do I have to go to the mill now? Do I have to go? No, I knew now, right? Because I would get the ticket. Process transparency, where before I didn't know. Did someone steal my paper ticket? No. It was transparent because it would come from by online ticket, direct delivery online, and procedural fairness. So there was little opportunity for anyone to game the system because the tickets get out centrally and then you get yours and not someone to cut in by grabbing your tickets or doing something. So in this particular aspect, notice, the monetary aspect was less stressed than in particular procedural fairness. It means it's a fair process for everyone. Of course, so distribution is also positive, and this is then, Achim, you talked about trust. This is how trust arises, right? You have transparency in the system and procedural fairness. Sometimes we don't believe the outcome has to be fair, but if the process is fair, yeah, so I can live with that, right? I don't get a ticket this time because there are so many others, but at least I know the process worked. It's very powerful. So therefore, this very simple, you might say, innovation driven by the input from the local knowledge made this possible. So a fantastic example for me of how collective intelligence works with a appropriate innovation for the context. So lessons learned, simple, inexpensive, created through local input, economic benefits, and procedural and distributive fairness, as I said. So not dwelling on this more, let me then move on to the source underlying that, namely collective intelligence. And so this is, as pointed out, this has been dear to my heart for many years. And so I should not go on before defining this a little bit, where I say collective intelligence is a form of intelligence that emerges from the collaboration and cooperation. Is actually not cooperation among many individuals. Collective, sometimes it is competition, but I'll leave that out for now. Collective intelligence appears in a wide variety of forms of consensus decision-making in not just human beings, but also various other forms of life, ants, bacteria you see here, and of course computers as well. Collective intelligence arises from, and this is where the source lies, aggregation of fragmented knowledge of multiple people whose knowledge arises from independent sources shaped by individual acquisition and transformation. And so then it enables, so these essentially performance above that of everybody else. And just so as one quick example of that, for those who are in the classroom, so if you're in any teaching capacity, especially if you have a senior audience, you have graduate students or something, oftentimes, and this was my first experience when I went into my first class as a professor teaching a course of databases. And so I walked into the classroom and every one of my students was a database administrator, database manager, and so on. And I thought to myself, what as a, at that point in time, barely 30-year-old professor, what can I teach these people? Altogether, they know a lot more than I know, right? And so, which is one of the roles in collective decision-making, and that's the role of the coordinator. There are people who bring in the intelligence, so you might say the raw knowledge, and there are others who facilitate it and put it all together and aggregate that. And that's really one of the roles as teachers we have, so as you might say knowledge facilitators we have, and that empowers us, and that requires that extra level that we are trained with during our process of our advanced education. So let me give a little bit mundane example, or a couple of mundane examples as I start out, but I think they are quite meaningful because they bring together for us this understanding of how this works. And this example comes from the United States, the National Football League. Think of this is, if you don't understand American football, no big thing, think of it like soccer. So this is every week they play these games, just like in the Bundesliga or La Liga or something like that. And there used to be online in America some exercise, or ESPN I think ran those, on letting the crowd, so anybody who wanted to give some guess of who's going to win in these games, let them take their guesses. And so the idea was you have the crowd take guesses, and then some experts. So these are the journalists, former coaches, and so on, the people who really know. And they so bias this situation, in fact, even more. The experts would, before they had to give their guesses, be allowed to know what the crowd was guessing. So they already knew, so this is what the unwashed masses think who's going to win, A versus B, and then they would give theirs, and so it was, in a way, a competition of the experts against the crowd. Now, given what I already said, I shouldn't say, who do you think won? Because who won? The crowd, which might seem a little bit unbelievable because here the experts have all the advantage. They already know what the crowd's thinking, and then they have their own. Shouldn't they perform better? And I give you an example of this. So as they were telling up over years, so think of it like 16 games every week, and then you run it over like something like roughly 15 weeks. And so the crowd guessed right 165 times and wrong 75 times. And as you can see, the experts 157 times right. So they were close, 159, 162, but nobody coming to the level of the crowd. And this was not just 1 year. 1 year, next year, next year. They don't run this anymore. I think it's kind of too embarrassing for the experts to always be behind the crowd, as they already have the full knowledge. And I think we all understand you're kind of in a little bit of embarrassing situation if you're an expert and you know already what the crowd's thinking. You have to, in some ways, change your result from that, because otherwise you end up just as good as you're just copying like what the crowd's doing. So you have to, on some games, have to guess differently, but don't do it, right? So don't go against the crowd. This is an interesting example. Now the question then, of course, is why does the crowd know more than these sports journalists, coaches who should know everything? And the answer of that lies really in what I mentioned before, fragmented knowledge. In, you know, if you are in some kind of regional market, it just rained there somewhere in your city, and or the coach had a hangover and is not ready for the game or whatever. So the local information is that may affect the outcome, which the sports journalist may not know. They know sports, but they don't know all the finer details, which contextualizes the knowledge to the situation. And then that contextualization creates the advantage. So quite dramatic. So in this case, as I said, time and again, college football, the National Football League, and so other games was a very strong example. If you want to see this in other situations, there have been these decision markets or information markets sometimes where the crowd guesses and they run in kind of like a stock market. Time and again, it's really dramatic. So here I just amplify this. Then let me illustrate another example also, so from something that I think near and dear to us, so to familiarize a little bit, and that is the millionaire game. This game has existed in over 200 countries and regions in the world. So I'm sure where you grew up, where you work, live, or so, you have seen this game. Who wants to be a millionaire, right? And it still runs. It may not run in your country anymore, it still runs in, I think, 180 markets in the world. This is super popular. And the big thing about this is here, so the expert has to guess. If you don't know the game, the expert has to guess the answer. They always get 4 options, guess the answer. And if you guess right, you can get to the next level. If you guess wrong, you're done. So it's an up or out type thing. Quite dramatic. And if you don't know the answer, you have 3 lifelines. So I'm looking around whether you remember 3 lifelines, and one of them is ask the audience. But you know, these questions are not so easy. So ask the audience. It's like you're asking the unwashed masses. You're the expert, and why should the audience know? And the audience knows. This is so scary. So how does this work? I illustrated with a not so difficult example, but nevertheless, it gets the point. Not so difficult. So here one question is, which of these was not an original member of the operatic singing group, the 3 tenors? 3 tenors, as you remember. And so you can tip Luciano Pavarotti, Jose Carreras, Andrea Bocelli, and Placido Domingo, A, B, C, D. And so you have to pick A, B, C, D. So if now the expert doesn't know the answer, they can now ask the audience, right? And so let's say if you're an audience member, you may not be so an opera buff and therefore do not know. I don't know these. But interesting enough, as I point out, the audience will make good guesses. And if you have watched this on TV, you know the audience is pretty reliable in what they're doing. And so what happens here, and this is so interesting, is that members of the audience will typically not know, but they know what to exclude. So I said fragmented partial knowledge. I know whom to rule out in a way. So I may not say, oh, I know, it's kind of, bring it down to, oh yeah, I know A or B. No, but I know it's not D or something like that, right? And so then they may have a kind of list of their subjective decision making. And based on that, they may say, so let's say if every one of them can rule out 2 names, that's the point that I want to make. If everybody in the audience can already rule out 2 names, you'll find the right answer. And I'll illustrate. So let's say this is our audience, 6 people, and you have Agnes. And Agnes knows this is the right answer or this is the right answer. But she thinks absolutely no, absolutely no. So Agnes would never vote for these, but here she's undecided. Now Alfred, same thing as Agnes. So they have kind of the same profile. Bob and Bertie, same thing. They think it's either this one or this one answer, but they definitely think it's not this one or this one. And so Selena and Chris, They absolutely know it's not A, and they absolutely know it's not C, but they're undecided between B and D. Now here you can already, what happens is, if I'm Agnes, and now I have to flip a coin, right? Because I'm only allowed to press one button. So let's say I press randomly. Agnes presses randomly this one, but Alfred may also press randomly and press then B. So if this all turns out, and of course that's where where I simplify a little. If this all turns out, so this should be Agnes. Agnes presses this one, Alfred this one, Bob this one, and so on. If we tally this now all up, Pavarotti gets 16% votes, but Bocelli, so the B answer, gets actually votes from lots of people and ends up with 50% of the votes. And you have 16%, 16%. So the crowd never knew. So it's not 50% of the crowd know the right answer. It's 100% of the crowd know the half right answer. 100% of the crowd knows the 50% answer. And then what it turns out, so in the statistical evaluation, is something like this. And so this is the real result. So this is real, as you can see, the audience knew B is the right answer. And so if, as the expert, I follow the crowd, 92% of the time, I get the right answer. The crowd is right 90% of the time. And I'm not making it, only in Russia, there's research evidence that don't follow the crowd, because the crowd misleads the player purposely. So that's their game. That's the crowd's game, right? It's published data. So quite unique finding. But so otherwise, it's a reliable result. But so this is the point to remember. We may not know the right result, but we can rule out some not so right results. Partial knowledge, partial formulae, partial so evidence, and then we lump that together, and that overall in aggregation gets us to the right place. Even if you can only rule out 1 out of 4, it works. So just so the difference between the peaks and the valleys gets a little bit smaller. Okay, and I already pointed that out, over 90%. Now, the world is not just pressing a button to vote. The world is typically more complex decision making. So oftentimes we need a process to facilitate that, right? So it's a knowledge creation process. And in a way, we understand this in an industrial situation, because in an industrial situation, and I picked here this example of a CD player manufacturing plant in Thailand. In Thailand, you know, they manufacture CD players, which are still used today. And these are, you might say, these are expert CD manufacturers, workers, right? Are they expert? No, they are originally farm workers who were brought into the plant to make now CDs. And they do a high precision job, because as you know, so CDs, really high precision machinery. And if I had to build my own CD machinery, I know I couldn't do it. But the way they can do it is because they are part of a process. And so a process designer who designed really a process, which is split up into process steps, where we create some micro expertise, structured, coordinated micro expertise, and repetition. Structured micro expertise and repetition. And once we have that, then we can apply the same principle of industrial production to, you might say, industrial knowledge production. Structure, coordinate, micro expertise, repeat. And I give you one more example. This is for those you have children, nephews, or so on. Let's say this is your child's room, and you go to your child and say, make up your room, to your young child, early in years. You come back 2 hours later, and the room still looks like this, right? And you say, what happened here? Because they don't have a process. You didn't give them these micro steps. What you forgot to tell them is, okay, there's one step we call put away your toys. So put toys in box. Hang clothes into a wardrobe. So steps that I can carry out. And once I have these focused micro expertise steps, and so we work those all out, make my bed, put blanket on bed. And once you give people small, repeatable, clear steps to process, they can actually do them. And so once they do them all, then you say, and now we call this whole thing that I just taught you, make up your room. And then it's repeatable, right? And so we can do this also with collective intelligence, and thereby, so we quote unquote industrialize collective intelligence. So seems so simple. You always do this with your children, so you know, so you're already industrialist in that domain. If we now look at that example, so in a more applied real world context, namely, so in the world of wikis, and this is why wikis work, we see this. So the wiki was really, among the world web, is one of those famous innovations because they really created knowledge advantages which were previously unseen. And I purposely didn't pick Wikipedia, but here Wiki Travel, which is your Wikipedia if you're a traveler. And so you can look up pretty much any city in the world, even subparts of cities, and look up the knowledge. Or you can add to this, because in every wiki, there should be really what's referred to as the edit button, right? So that you can go in and actually add this. You can edit Wikipedia. If you don't know, there is an edit button. And here is the, I talked about some microprocess or a process and micro steps. The way these things are structured is, so if I'm a contributor and I have fragmented knowledge, I don't know anything, but I know where to go for drinks in Paris. So if this is all I know, I can contribute to this global knowledge production. Why? Because someone structured this knowledge construct in a way that I can contribute. And this is the beauty of it, right? Industrializing the knowledge production. Because they're all structured like see, do, buy, eat, drink, sleep. And so I can go to drink, and then I can, and there's another edit button. And I can just deposit my fractional knowledge into this repository, and thereby make a knowledge contribution. And all added up creates the larger knowledge construct that we have. And some of you may say, oh yeah, but it doesn't get all messy. Yeah, and that's where these, you might say, the knowledge facilitators, typically if we are in a classroom, that's the professor who sorts it all out, so unmesses things. But even in wikis, there are people who are just doing that job. They don't bother with putting in knowledge. They focus on restructuring, unstructuring, so that others can add more, and that so that this thing can keep on growing. And that's a role separation between knowledge contributors and structurers. But with that, so they really have a functioning symbiosis of people who jointly then create knowledge constructs. Quite fantastic. So we saw voting. Here now we see collective knowledge construction in a different way. And there are several other mechanisms, but I, today just example a few. So this is the wiki model. Individual micro contributions aggregated and curated by the collective. And I don't know whether you know this, Wikipedia has about, if we look at Wikipedia, about 50,000 editors. And most of the editors will actually do just small number of contributions. So 1% do 50% of the work, and 99% do the other 50% of the work. But fascinatingly, they do. So 99% do 50% of the work. There's also the YouTube model. And for me, this is really also it's not a wiki, but it's collectively bringing knowledge together. And then the interesting part is the curation, namely, so figuring out what's good, what's bad, and how this works, is view statistic and solver algorithms. So now they do timing, and so they show you where certain events happen. And so with that, YouTube's become now much more usable, and I just use YouTube as one example. So as a knowledge sharing vehicle, for those of you who you're in your DIY situation, or if you are in a developing country and you want to learn certain practices, how to cut hair, how to repair cars or so, this is now a medium. So this is your university, right? And then there is, and this is fascinating, by the way, the TikTok model. Some of you may say, oh, isn't TikTok the same thing as YouTube, just so shorter? No, actually, yes, it is. Yes, it is YouTube, but shorter. But it is, in a way, much clever. You have individual micro contributions by many, but notice this is small contribution. This is like the 10-minute contribution, and this is maybe the half-minute or 1-minute contribution. And when you have half-minute contributions, everything is so concentrated. And if I pick the wrong video, not much harm done, because I still have 9.5 minutes to look for more. But then they have this enormous, essentially this auto-curation process. You can swipe with your thumb, swipe left, swipe right. If you didn't like it, so you just swipe it away. If you want more of them, you swipe to the side, and then you get more of the same. And as you're doing that, you are adding likes in a way to or look to this this particular TikTok video, and therefore bring it up in the statistics. Plus, and this is the enormous beauty of the TikTok algorithm, they have such a tight algorithm of understanding what you like, that they deliver to you really according to your preference. So it's frightening. Sometimes you almost get stuck because you see things over and over again, but it's that's what they figured out much better than YouTube figured out. So this, in terms of preference, like honing in on the customer's preferences, customers, viewers' preference, TikTok model is a much stronger one in delivering this, so the knowledge as if we just focus on knowledge as you like it. Okay, collective creativity. Now that's a whole new different set, because in collective intelligence, knowledge creation, we oftentimes want to aggregate, and so we kind of sum it all up. And collective creativity, as you know, creativity is really something like a unique thing, right? We want to create the new to the world, the one-off solution. And so how can collectives do that? So they have to operate a little bit, we have to operate a little bit different, because we're really looking at the margins, so at the tail ends of the distribution, but we can still look at that in a collective. And for many years, and I did one study on this one, some of you may have read it, on creativity supported by computers at the time. That was in the 90s, so we had the hope of computers supporting people in becoming more creative. And so one of the questions we asked our subjects is the airline no-show problem, which is a traditionally well-known problem. Is if you buy full fare tickets, most of us don't, but if you buy full fare tickets, you just don't show up for the flight, no problem, ticket's still good, you just rebook. So this is the beauty of full fare. So especially if you buy so that's the highest fare classes typically, but bad for the airline, because the seat's empty, and they still have to refund you the price of your ticket. And so they could have filled this with someone who was probably standing by, or no, not standing by, but standing there or trying to fly and couldn't take the seat. So the airline no-show problem has traditionally, no-show problems, not just with the airline, has been a vexing problems for the operators of, you might say, perishable resources. And so they have looked for ways to overcome that. And so typical ways for overcoming that is, just as you know, or you give people a better price if they show up, otherwise you lose your ticket. Or you give them some other benefits, or you get miles if you show up, or you give people like upgrades, or do something so that people actually show up, do what they are saying. And so this is typically, when you ask people, how can we solve this? This is something very easy for them to generate as answers, and this would be considered, incentive giving. So there's lots of people will say, oh yeah, we can give incentive this kind. They don't say we give incentive, we give some example. Others may talk about, oh, we can make the plane smaller, can use a smaller plane if people are not showing up, roll it out on the runway and give them a smaller plane, and so on. And so you'll see solutions clustering along here. And then some people may say, oh, we should penalize these people. They are never allowed to fly again with us, and so on. Yeah, possible. And now, as you can see graphically, if we see what they are doing, so we can abstract from there, right? We can abstraction. So all these are penalty solutions, all these are incentive solutions, all these are resource sizing solutions. And then you see a few, you might say, golden solutions, because only very few people came up with those, right? And I'm not going to talk about that so much, but so when we are in the collective, I may go with these and work on this principle, penalties, and say, what are other penalties? Penalties we haven't thought of, or what are other incentives we haven't thought of? Oh, can I send a limo to your home and pick you up and you didn't really want to come, but so come up with new solutions in this space, or as a collective, we go after these golden solutions and drive further. And I think I will not dwell too much on this one. So so I'll skip a few of these slides on how the collective creativity might work. But the bottom line is, maybe just illustrate, no, I'll skip. One point that I should mention is one way of helping a creative crowd to come up with a solution is really then by decomposing. And that is really, so I already showed this in the wiki example, namely you give people only a small task to work on. Same thing in a creativity task. Don't give them everything to work on. So just, just work on it. If you have to design a new rocket, one that lands on the ground. Some people work on this, and some people work on this, some people work on this, and suddenly the job becomes easier. So in creativity, we do the same thing. And with that, let me then also, and I'll ask you a question. If I give a problem to a group of people, or first of all, to individuals, so I give the problem as individuals to solve as a holistic problem. This is a difficult problem for many people to solve. If all poor people in the world would give you 1% of their annual earnings, how much money would you have? I know this is a difficult problem because we tried this out with various audience, and so it's one of those typical problems which illustrates decomposition helps a lot. So if I give this to an average college crowd, many will not find an answer. Okay, but if we start breaking this down, and that's why I said, remember, make up your room is difficult, but if I say, okay, decompose, what's the percentage of poor people in the world, right? And you kind of, okay, let me run the numbers. And so some of you may say, what do you mean by poor? And so, but if United Nations may say, oh, like what, $2 a day or something like that, 160 day is so definition of poor, okay, figure this out, maybe this is 1% or something, come up with a number. For this, we can come up with a number, right? This is kind of doable. What's the total world population? Oh, I can do this, right? Total world population I can do. It's like, what, 8 million or something like that. What's the definition income of poverty? If there's United Nations, there's $1.60 or $2, okay, so this is in a year, there's like $500, $600, $700, somewhere like that, right? I can do this. And then, 1%, I can do 1% of 700, right? This is still in my ability. And so then, okay, I have to think 1% of poverty income. So this is the of world population. Now I can solve this thing. Okay, what seemed to be like a difficult task before, suddenly when I break this down into kind of do this, yeah, now I can solve this. So, and this is where the power of the, you might say, of the problem facilitator comes in. Takes something that's seemingly highly complex, just breaks it down and lets the crowd work on decomposed tasks. And with that, enables us, and I don't know anything about world population, but I know how much I make as a poor person. That's my expertise. I make $2 a day or something. That's my expertise. So I can contribute to this. So with decomposition, we enable really a lot of power. So with that, having illustrated a few of those principles of why collective intelligence works, let me move on saying, why does collective intelligence kind of almost forces artificial intelligence on us? So this is almost like an inevitable process. Oops. An inevitable process. And let me illustrate with credit approval. So for those of you who lived through the early days of credit approval, early credit cards, or wanting a bank loan, like if it was a bank loan, you would go to the bank, to the loan officer, and beg for your bank loan. And then you provide some of your factual information, how much money you earn and so on, or have you lived at your address for a long time? Are you a good citizen? And this is, oh, you put on a nice suit, so that you look credible to the bank officer, because they make a holistic judgment on whether they should give you the loan. And even in the early days of credit cards, when credit cards were more like a bespoke thing, you might say, not you getting 10 of those application forms in your mail every day. It was really so, and there were people who were they would get your paper application, they would read through this, and so make their judgment. And if you ask them, what's your rule of doing that? Oh, seemed like a solid citizen, and so we should give them the loan. But whenever we do this, so of course then, and this is why I'm saying it's almost inevitable, the how would I put, the people who look at processes are looking to say, we must be able to automate that, make this faster, more reliable, and more independent of the individual as they're choosing. So let me actually go through my PowerPoint here. So traditionally, loan officers based their judgment on some holistic criteria, considering quantitative and qualitative data. And I can remember, so the personal example, when my parents were building the house in the 1960s in Hamburg, and so the bank didn't want to give the loan. My mother went to the bank and pled, as I said, for example, to give our family the loan so that we could build a house. This was not unusual. So kind of really making your case in person. Okay, and so the loan officer would judge based on typical factors like, can you pay back? Are you willing to pay back? That's another issue. And they may have not a specific algorithm. That's the amazing thing. No specific algorithm. And then the question arises, can we build a system that bootstraps that so we automates that? And so the interesting thing is, if typically when we have such a process where we know we have the input data and then we have the decisions people are making, we can, if you know statistics, we run something kind of regression analysis or something like that and figure out, even if the person didn't use regression or linear model, that they oftentimes behave as if they used a linear model. And that's what's so interesting about it. So they actually, the humans who said, no, I'm doing this holistically, I have no specific rules, but when you run this through a computer program, a statistical problem, they really behave as if they had, somehow in their brain, they had it wired as if they run some kind of a linear model. And the interesting thing, however, is as they do that, and when we run this, we find out actually that, yes, they do have a linear model, but once we extract the model they are using and then use that model versus them, the linear model which we extracted from them is better than they are. Oh, how is that possible, you might say? So I repeat to that. So if I take all my loan officers and look at the decision they made, and then so take all the data, run it through my linear regression algorithm, and so come up with a formula. So take the income that you're earning times your factor, so much that times your factor, and so on. Then that algorithm performs better than the loan officers. Wow. And it's because loan officers will have idiosyncrasies. They have a bad day, Monday morning, long weekend and so on. So they make subjective decisions. Someone's coming and pleading, really, please, and they're so soft heart, got it. And so they make decisions which are subjective. And whenever they make these subjective decisions, they're deviating from their own implicit algorithms. That's when they're weaker. So you see this curve here. This curve is essentially if your belly is big here, that means you make a lot of good decisions versus few bad decisions. If your curve were like this, that makes you would make a lot of bad decisions for good decisions. And this is what the loan officers, this is published data, the loan officers, so if they're doing better than linear would be it's almost like a random toss. They're doing better than the random toss, but the algorithm based on their decisions is doing better than they do. And that's for loan decisions. That's for admission decisions for graduate programs. Same thing. You have admission officers. If you abstract what they're doing and run through a linear regression, it's better than their decision making. More objective. Okay. And so how does it work? And I see Achim already pointing to my speeding up here a little bit. Well, there are various models doing that. One's linear regression. One is neural networks, which is so currently a very popular one, working really on a principle where you have these inputs into individual neurons, and you produce outcomes. And the neuron is really, you think of it, it's more like it's an on-off switch, but in a way like an organic on-off switch. It doesn't have just off-on, as you can see there. So a point of indecision here as this moves up, and this area is really what makes a neural network more, let's say, allows with, how would I put it, decision making which deals with uncertainty a little bit better. Now, typically neural networks don't consist of one neurons. They don't consider, as your complexity rises, you have more and more and more, so that very quickly you might end up with quite complex neural networks. And as you know, we are moving now to neural networks which are so I'm jumping a little bit, which are moving in complexity to, as you can see, model sizes of into the millions of parameters. So this is moving up dramatically in complexity. And with that, so these large neural networks, and one of them being here, of course, so here, so GPT, GPT-2, GPT-3, 170 billion, and it's moving up dramatically in complexity. So whereby these systems now becoming, in terms of processing power, and there is a power to differentiate, dramatically good. With that comes, there is a price to this. And I don't know whether you know this, namely, they consume a lot of energy. So GPT-3 consumed to train it 1.3 gigawatt hours of energy. GPT-4, which is a current GPT model, about 50 to 60 gigawatt hours. And you might say, what's a gigawatt hour? So city of Hamburg, 45 days. That's 50 to 60 gigawatt hours, okay? And so if we move now a year from now to GPT-5, we might be then so 10 times more. That might be so Germany, for a month or something like that. So this is very serious energy consumption. Of course, by no means comparable to Bitcoin, where Bitcoin currently takes about 0.6% of the world's electricity consumption. Right? This is just Bitcoin, not all this Bitcoin. This is, but we will soon, lights out. So as these models get larger, and not just any of the companies who will want to run them, but lots of companies will run them. But now, how good are these models? I asked ChatGPT my question. It couldn't do the exact question I asked you, okay? I had to dumb it down a little. If you collected $1 from every person on Earth who earns less than $500 a year, how much money would you have? And so this is an easier question, as you can see, right, than the one I gave. But it could derive the answer. So these models now, and these are, even though they work heavily on textual, but there is decomposition built in. And so, as you can see, it lays out the logic quite well. According to the World Bank's definition, what's poor, then kind of how many people in the world, so it maps it out really and comes up with a proper solution. This is scary. This is, I showed you a picture, I showed you this now, a question that is difficult for human beings, done by ChatGPT 3. And this is 3.5, this is not 4. So, and here coming to my final plea and saying, where are we going then? And so my view is, in this world, so very soon we'll see, there is there's something which we might refer to as commodity knowledge. And this is kind of free stuff that everybody knows, so to speak. Kind of that's worth nothing. You cannot make money off this. It costs you nothing, okay? This is all the free knowledge. But then we will be moving into a zone where artificial intelligence is actually rather strong and can take a lot of, you might say, jobs, tasks, decisions, insights away from individuals who held that before, whether it's journalists, image creators, and so on. And so this is your area of artificial intelligence expertise, and this is definitely commercially viable and actually moving up in quality quickly for a price. And where will then these humans lie? So because this is eaten up by AI, in what I think is what I refer to as artisan intelligence. And artisan intelligence, as you know, artisans, so there's a creative element, there is a specialization element, uniqueness element, and where we don't codify. And so you can see what I can do in my work outcome, but there's not necessarily a formal process, right? I'll leave this out as well. So the artisan creativity, skill, tacit knowledge, not codified, new to the world outcomes, and tangible outcomes as work product. And the intention, the knowledge, and the skill are told in the outcome. One of the examples might be your Stradivarius, where people still today are wondering how can a Stradivarius 300 years still sound so fantastic? Is it the glue? Is it the varnish? What is it? And how is it that the glues don't dry up? The creators didn't give their recipe, right? Because that was competitive advantage, and even today. Another example might be Warren Buffett's own algorithm of how to beat all the stock markets for the last 50 years or something, and having a yield of 150 times so the New York or this S&P 500, and nobody can figure out how he actually did it, because after all the information should be public after all. But nobody has beaten him, right? So this is, to me, also in a way artisan knowledge in a way. And so with that, let me then come to the end and say collectives can perform at a higher level than individuals through aggregation of fractional knowledge, which I hope to illustrate, process and repetition. And then we see that artificial intelligence, so because it learns all these techniques, because we find a way to codify them, parameterize their insights, and suddenly, so this is stolen from us, right? As you will know, ChatGPT-4 has absorbed all the public web, including Wikipedia and so on, so knows everything that Wikipedia knows and a lot more. And then these large prediction models, GPT is, for example, one of the large prediction models, can approach the performance of human experts, particularly on structured tasks, and perform much better. I raised by an example which said, if you measure GPT-4's IQ on IQ tests. So this is it's an unfair example, but the score would be around 150 these days. That doesn't mean GPT is as smart as a person who has an IQ of 150. It just on that standardized test can score so well, because that is really something that a standard method can do. Human superiority may increasingly rely on private knowledge, extreme specialization, new to the world creativity, artisan-like activity, and average AI level performance will become near commodity. And with that, I say, I go full circle. We came from the collective, said, okay, now the AI takes over. Now I have to become an artisan. That means I hold on to my knowledge. And isn't this crazy? And we started this all through the World Wide Web. Thank you.
Mille, grazie, mille. Vielen Dank, Christian. Our true responsibility is to really, sustainably means to take your knowledge and the wisdom, all the puzzle stones, all the connections, and try to make the best out of it. The artisan life, the art of living, collective expertise, collective passion, collective action to make our living space, our living room, like the room of a child. We have a lot to, let's say, to clean up with processes, with a language, with expertise, with dignity for humans, for all of us, and for the human civilization, in order to have a positive future. Thank you so much.
And we have questions.
Great, please. Mark Oliver.
So, first of all, thank you very much for the very interesting topic and also for your super engaged presentation, which I enjoyed a lot. So I'm a cybersecurity researcher, and therefore, summing up a little bit this collective intelligence, it's a little bit statistics of large numbers. So you have confidence in things that appear often. And with the JetGPT, the large language models, we now have a tool to create things that seem to be true, and we can spam the entire system. We can create so much fake news that we can break the entire process. And my question is not, is there a solution for that? Because probably there you will not have an answer. If you have, I'm also happy to tell me. But my question is, how does this affect your research? Because this is something new that comes in, that came in the last year maybe, or maybe the last 1.5 years, but it's less in the last year. And I would expect it has a large impact on what you presented to us, because it's tricking us humans, it's tricking our brains, and it's a super big bias to the process you present.
Thank you for pointing that out. So let me first say something about we as researchers, so in the academic research, we are one of the lesser affected categories of people, because we are at the artisan level in a way, okay? And so if, and which I have of course done, so ask ChatGPT to produce some, quote unquote, produce some research for me, some background for papers or so. It gives an overview, it gives your college level overview, but it doesn't give you really the level that I would want to share with fellow researchers. And so, can it not do this? Well, at least it's not yet trained for that. And if you know these large language models, so they're trained on the vast body of knowledge, and then they have a front end or the fine tuning. The front end is not yet for this task. We are sort of the outliers, and we do bespoke stuff, right? I think for many of us, doesn't mean it's not useful. No, because that level, so the bottom is the base camp. Yes, we can look it up. And I don't know whether you know, and I think that's on purpose. So GPT also, if you ask it for references, it gives fake references, right? So don't.
Yeah, very short question.
Oh, yes.
You're doing research in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And how does it relate to the masses the Chinese people are imposing on Hong Kong, and how disinformation and all this, the whole complex? How can you put that your research together with that maybe media in Hong Kong are limited and prohibited by the Chinese government, or is that again disinformation either?
Since I'll give a very quick answer, and then I come.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. So, just simply said, for researchers and I'm coming from an engineering science discipline, it affects me relatively little, right? Realistically, and all individuals who are driving really in a way for solutions that are so technology-based advancements for the world are very much, we do what we do, and so we are kind of, you might say, we are blunt tools, and we do our tool work quite unaffected. If you were a humanist or working in political science, I think your life is now more complicated than it used to be, because you have to so understand what your limits of your discussion are. Okay. Okay, but before I want to come to quick answer to this question, and so from that perspective, where I see the next step of the AI, and as I actually wrote about this, is creating the models for us. So your researchers always, what we do is we have theories and then we apply them to case and then we test them and improve the theories. And nowadays, papers, journal articles are already so well structured that you can extract actually the model. So a smart technology should be able to do that. Next step, and then they extract the models, and then you say to your AI collaborator, which models should apply to this problem. And with that, so especially if you're a junior, and I don't mean this, so a early career scientist, you might work instantly with 50, 60 models, where us old guys who just learned the old ways may only know 2 or 3 or 4, and so this will give you a dramatic advantage. Okay, this would be my my answer to that. Okay.
Thank you very much. I like the comments about the trust at the beginning, and you're a specialist in social media. I'm very interested to hear from you. Where do you see the truth in social media in 10, 20 years? How will this develop? And we have lots of comments about the value of the news that we
yes,
follow.
I view this with quite a bit of skepticism, because in reality, what we have to see is that any kind of medium can be recreated. I showed you a simple picture. Soon it'll be videos, videos based on just descriptions of the topic and maybe some dialogue. Already we are close to that, right? And so you'll almost not be able to trust anything anymore that you see or hear or read unless you are there in the room, right? And then, of course, if I'm a philosopher, then I would say, how do I know that you're sitting in the room, that you are real? Or how do you know that I'm real? But that's another philosophical. But it is, there's this German, der Zauberling, the spirits they are summoned. We summon them and now we have to deal with them because they are not necessarily doing what we want them to do. And so this promise I do not see realized, because it's we really have to find a way of defining reality. And so censoring that by disallowing what we believe is misinformation will not be the way. But it's we have to find a way where and maybe face-to-face may still become the medium of choice. I wouldn't be surprised if we really want to believe.
Annie, please.
Thanks for the interesting presentation. My question is regarding the point that I didn't read a paper because it's difficult to read paper currently about ChatGPT because the academia is much too slow. But what I read was basically that they found out that the output of such large language model is decreasing, so it's getting worse, if you start feeding or let them interact with each other. So my question is, where does, is there any research regarding where the collective intelligence, where the feed needs to come from, where the the knowledge snippet come from? Is there anything there? And do you agree with this, or have you heard any research, about basically the quality increase or decrease of ChatGPT, depending who is actually interacting with the system?
Oh, thanks for pointing it out. So in a way, GPT-4, harvest already everything that's publicly available, right? That's pretty much, this is already now done. And there's, I think, the 160 gigabytes of data. So, now grabbing, so secondary is no good, because this really lives off, so you might say, primary information. And that's exactly where my point came from. Now, you as a creator of proprietary information, what we used to refer to as patents or otherwise, let's say personal private information, you have the advantage there, because that will be the next farming ground for these technologies in order to reach that next level. And as you all know, if you want to make your stock market tips, everything you get for free as information is typically not particularly useful for you, because it is chatter, and the information which gives you the advantage is the rare one that gives you really the unique advantage, right? So in all that, that's what we are going to see. And So there is probably not much room here thereafter for getting that much better. The improvements I would see in the capabilities comes really from this causal reasoning thereafter, because these models are quite shallow. They don't look shallow, but they are they're operating in the conversational, so at the predicting what what the text should be following. It worked very well. So, but this comes to a limit, and then now breaking problems apart into smaller problems, and then finding answers in, and then bringing out. That's, I think, where the next that will come in. So mimicking in a way more what the human does, because we are doing everything that these technologies do in a much more efficient way, right? So this is like output per watt or something like that. So it may not answer your question fully, but it's the best I'll do right now. Thank you. Thank you.